Lock in all sports, all plays, all 5% best bets for the next 30 days from your favorite WagerTalk handicapper for only $1.99 versus the regular price of $3.49 for a total savings of $1.50. Prices are already discounted across the board and no coupon is required. Just head over to WagerTalk.com, pick your favorite handicapper in the experts menu, and lock them in for 30 days across all sports for only $1.99.
Welcome to Bet On It. I'm Kelly Stewart. On today's show, we're going to talk Final Four, get some TNA from Ralph, break down the look ahead lines from our friends over at the Westgate Superbook. And at the end of the show, we're going to give out our best bets for the Final Four. Let's bring in our Wager Talk experts, Marco D'Angelo and Ralph Michaels. Gentlemen, what an awesome set of games we saw this past week. Sweet 16, Elite 8. I'd love to chat about in this first segment what we learned. Marco, tell me what we learned from your perspective.
Well, first off, Kelly, congratulations to the three of us. We all hit our best bets last week, so that's always nice to open the show with a little pat on the back there. We like that. Observations from the Sweet 16, to me, it was pretty much a rerun of what we've seen so far. We saw a lot of dogs. We saw slow starts to games, unders in the first half. We thought we might see, some pickup with that, being that they're getting more accustomed to where they're playing. But all of the games in the Elite Eight were at Lucas Oil, and now they're going to be obviously playing at Lucas Oil again. So that should factor in when we talk about, if there's slow starts again or not, because they should be getting familiar with the venues. But Kelly, looks like it's Gonzaga's tournament to lose. They have looked absolutely impressive. And unfortunately for me, I was on the wrong side of that one. I got to start working on the Final Four games a little early with that one because USC wasn't making a comeback.
Unfortunately, Marco, they did not, and they made the Zags look really good. Hopefully just a little too good. We'll get to that game a little later on. Ralph, what were some of your observations from the Sweet 16 and Elite 8?
Well, coming down the stretch, the top four teams in power ratings were Houston, the Zags, Baylor, and Michigan. And, the interesting things were this. We didn't know how good Baylor was because after their post-COVID drop, they failed to cover 4 out of 5 games. They lost back-to-back games. People had them dropped in their power rating to the number 3 or 4 team, bumping Houston up. All year, we really didn't know how good the Zags were. Yes, I had them as my number 1 team in my power ratings, but because of their strength of schedule and who they played, we just didn't really know how good they are. So I've never seen a tournament like this where we had the teams bunched so close power rating-wise at the start of the tournament, and we've seen one team expand their power rating like the Zags. So, UCLA deserves a lot of credit. They're a team that, no one expected them to be there, being a number 11 seed and being a play-in team. But when you look at what they've done on offense, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, everyone talks about their defense. But in 5 March Madness games, they've only had 35 turnovers. That's absolutely amazing.
Great stat, Ralph. I'm going to write that one down. Marco, any other little nuggets you found last week and anything you're going to be using in the next round?
Well, Kelly, I talked about it when I did the Prez's and Teddy's show on Monday, Wager Talk Today, about utilizing in-game wagering. And I had talked about the game on Monday with Oregon State. And I said, this is going to be a low-scoring game. It's going to start slow. But I think this game's going to get over the total. And I said, wait till they have that slow start and then come in, put a little wager, full game on the under, but just, small. I'm going to come in as the game moves on and get the better numbers. And we did. We kept seeing the number drop down to where all of those in-game wagers that I took for the overs got there and was able to cash. So again, it's a pattern that we see time and time again when you get to the big games, because the teams are tight, the pressure situations, because of the venues, they're playing in bigger arenas and stuff. They have those slow starts, and then they start to figure things out. And then when they in these games, because this is it, there's no tomorrow. Teams don't give up. They keep fouling, trying to extend the game, and you're getting those cheap points at the end. And that's a pattern until it, as Ralph likes to say all the time, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay. So that's the one thing that I took away and I continue to look at.
I do like that little cliche from Ralph, but boy, do I think I'm going to break it against Gonzaga. We'll get to that a little bit later on. Ralph, any final thoughts on the Elite Eight and Sweet 16?
Well, we're looking at obviously a team here that, UCLA, a historic team, being an 11 seed. But, at this point in time, you're not looking past anyone. I still don't know how good. We'll talk about it obviously later, Kelly. I've been riding the Zags the first half this entire tournament because they just come out so prepared. But, at this point, I think what you really have to do is you don't worry about UCLA being an 11 seed. You don't worry how good Gonzaga is. You have to look at individual matchups, because what someone did now in November and December and even January is absolutely irrelevant. So look at talent, look at matchups, look at what they've done in this tournament, and don't worry about names, don't worry about seedings, don't worry about records.
All right, great stuff. Let's see what you've got for some TNA before we wrap up this segment.
Well, since we're down to the Final Four, there isn't much TNA because, again, the sample size is so small. So I don't want to try to data mine some information just to get something that may get you to lean on a game. I will say this, though. The last 5 years in the Final Four, the favorites have gone 9-1 straight up. The only dog to win was Wisconsin in 2015 against Kentucky. Favorites in the Final Four have gone 5-5 against the spread. UCLA, obviously 11th seed, and I said don't worry about seedings. But, it's not historic because there have been a 4 11 seeds to make it to the Final Four. LSU in 86, George Mason in 2006, VCU in 2011, and remember, Loyola of Chicago was here in 2018. We do have the highest Final Four line in the history as far as anyone can research and go back. The other Final Four numbers that have been 8.5 or more, in 1999, Duke was laying 11 to Michigan State. They only won by 6. North Carolina in 2013 was laying 10. They did cover against Syracuse. 2013, Louisville was laying 9.5 to Wichita. They only won by 4. And in 2012, Kentucky was laying 8.5 to Louisville, and they only won by 8, not covering. There was one 14-point spread in the title game back in 1996, Kentucky minus 14 against Syracuse, and they did not cover. So of those 5 Final Four and national championship spreads with a line of 8.5 or more, the dog has gone 4-1. And finally, everyone's right now writing the final synopsis saying it's Gonzaga against Baylor, the game we've all wanted to see. Remember this, since 2009, there have only been 2 number 1 versus number 1 games. 2015, Wisconsin against Duke, and 2017, these Zags were pick'em against North Carolina. The Tar Heels did win that game.
Thank you, Ralph. Those were some great nuggets. We're going to step out for a moment. When we come back, we're going to break down Houston and Baylor and UCLA Gonzaga.
Are you ready for baseball? The 2021 MLB regular season begins on April 1st and goes all the way through the World Series in November, giving fans over 200 days of baseball action. To help you have a profitable baseball season, WagerTalk has taken our top 2 handicappers and combined them in an amazing combo deal. The number 1 MLB overall all-time is Brian Leonard, and the number 1 MLB totals all-time is Dwayne Bryant. MLB through the World Series is priced at $10.95 per handicapper. $8.95 for early bird pricing. But right now you can lock in the #1 MLB all-time overall and #1 MLB all-time totals handicapper for the price of one. Lock in both Brian Leonard and Dwayne Bryant's baseball selections through the World Series in November for only $8.95.
Welcome back to Bet On It. Now it's time to talk these final 4 games. Let's start off with the Houston Cougars versus the Baylor Bears. Baylor, a 5-point favorite. Current total on the WagerTalk odds screen, 135.5. Marco, I'm going to go to you first. Your thoughts on this matchup? Do you think the line is right? Personally, I think it's a little bit short.
Yeah, Kelly, I do think it's a little bit short, and I want to build off of something that Ralph started to talk about with Baylor and saying, we didn't know coming into the tournament, really how good Baylor was or wasn't, because when they came back from the COVID break, they had some sluggish games. Well, you know what? I said it at the time, and I'm going to stick with it. That didn't bother me at all. And in fact, I think the COVID pause was the best thing that happened to Baylor, and I'll continue to ride that. It let them get a little bit of rest. They're one of the fresher teams coming into the tournament. And those games at the end of the season really didn't mean anything. They had the Big 12 wrapped up. It was theirs, because they had a couple sluggish performances. Kansas played their Super Bowl, that second game back when they had to go on the road to Kansas. That was a tough spot for them. But now they're in the tournament, and they've done everything asked of them. And if you look at them in the last 3 games, 3 of the last 4 games, they have played lights out defensively. 55, 63, and 51 points they gave up in 3 games to Wisconsin, Villanova, and Arkansas in the last game. Arkansas scored 72 points. I got to say this, as far as Baylor being a #1 seed, if you look at all the teams and look at the road to get to the Final Four, I think the path that Baylor played to get here was the toughest of any of the teams, the way, it worked out. #1 seeds are supposed to have an easier route to get here. But like I said, Wisconsin's a team that we talked about has been in the Final Four before. They're a sound defensive team. Yeah, they weren't the limelight team of the Big Ten, but all year we talked about how deep the Big Ten was. Then you had Villanova, a team that's won the national championship in the past few years. And then, an Arkansas team who was very athletic and, gave them a run for their money. I think Baylor is tested. They've played blowouts. They've played close games. They've played fast-paced games. They've played slow-paced games. I like Baylor in this one. Now, don't get anything wrong with Houston. They've been good, but I just don't see them sticking with Baylor. Defensively, they're tough to shoot threes against. That's what Houston's got going for them. But I think overall, offensively and defensively, Baylor is the better team. And as this game, the further it goes, Baylor will extend that. And the fact that Baylor did have that tight game with Arkansas late, I think proves to make them a better team here. I'm going to go ahead and go with Baylor. I'm going to lay the points with them and have them is my first play here on Bet On It.
Ralph, do you agree with Marco? Yes or no, and why?
Yes and no. The situation, #1, I think the line is too high. I mean, you look at Ken Palm's numbers, this is 2 against 3. Ken Palm picks a 1% game. My power ratings at the start of March Madness had Houston as the better team. So, I didn't update my power ratings through March Madness because once it starts, I start with a fresh set of numbers. But so I had Houston as the better team. And you look at Houston, Baylor's not an elite defensive team. They're an elite offensive team. They're a top 30 team as far as efficiency goes. You look at Houston is #1 in effective field goal percentage defense rated by Ken Palm. They're number 11 in the country in 3-point defense. They're number 5 in the country in 2-point defense. Here's my problem, though. In the history of the NCAA tournament, no team has ever gone to the Final Four facing 4 double-digit seeds. Houston had that. Marco talked about Baylor having the easiest route to get here. Houston played Cleveland State, Rutgers, Syracuse, and Oregon State 4 double-digit seeds. They've been a favorite of 6.5 or more. When you look at who they've played throughout the season, I looked between the fives. So if you're a big dog, a small favorite, or a small dog, how many competitive games have you played all year against a foe matched up? Houston's played two teams with the lines between the fives. They played SMU and they played Texas Tech. They split those games. Baylor, of course, played Wisconsin, Kansas, Texas, Texas Tech, Illinois. They are much more apt to be prepared for this game. And then when I look at what Houston has done offensively and defensively, yeah, their numbers impress me. But again, the strength of schedule does concern me. So while my power rating actually has Houston the better team, the situation Baylor did to get here, the offensive prowess that Baylor has, the 3 guards and Mitchell, Butler, and Teague that average 46 points. Houston's used to playing AAC competition and competition where, like when they shut down Syracuse, yeah, you had an elite player in Duran, who's the ACC Player of the Year, who could shut down Buddy Boeheim. But when you have 3 guards that average 46 points, that Houston defense can't be as effective. So breaking it down, like I said, this is where numbers and matchups and teams and situations differ. My power rating, again, had Houston the better team, but I think Baylor in this situation, with the offense they have, playing good enough defense, can win and cover this game.
Marco, I'd like to go back to you. I thought the line was a little short, and that's because it surprised me. I did think that this line would be higher. Sometimes when those lines come a little bit shorter, it's because the bookmakers are saying, come on, guys, bet the Baylor Bears. We're right over here. This is an easy one for all of the things you both mentioned. I'm sitting here looking at this adjusted tempo for Houston and the average possession length, 2 of the things that you can get on KenPom. And I'm thinking that they can stifle this Bears offense. This defense can get them out of a rhythm. Is that something that may concern you here if you're laying the points with Baylor?
Well, obviously, as both Ralph and I said, we feel Baylor's played the tougher schedule, both during the regular season and obviously through the March Madness, through the tournament. And I think that's going to carry them here. Baylor hasn't had that test. And Houston hasn't had that test. We saw Houston have a couple scares. The Rutgers game, they were lucky to get by in that game. They should have lost that game, to be honest. But, it made them stronger, and it's why I had the big play on them in the next game because they were able to dominate, and they had a week to prepare for Syracuse's matchup zone. Yes, they're going to have extra time to prepare for Baylor, but so is Baylor going to have extra time to prepare for that Houston defense and find the way to do it. And the one thing that Ralph said as he was saying it, and struck a bell to me, and that's the one thing that you do want to have. He mentioned the 3 guards that Baylor has. If you're playing a good defense, the best thing you want is 3 different players that can score for you, especially 3 different players that can handle the basketball and handle the pressure and have the basketball IQ to make the right passes to get to the open guy, whether you're kicking it in low and kicking it back out for the 3-point shot or finding the open guy in the corner just, to take the 3-point shot. I like to have those 3 guards with the ball, with the opportunity to dish and score. So I like Baylor.
The Baylor guard play does concern me, but I'd like to just play a little contrarian, Ralph, to something you said a minute ago in regards to the strength of schedule, particularly throughout the tournament. You mentioned Houston had a very easy schedule of sorts. They played a lot of higher-seeded teams. Baylor had a very tough route. Do you think that there's any fatigue possibility there just to play that contrarian angle?
No, not playing 2 games a week. I mean, that's what they're accustomed to all time. So it's very structured. Plus, remember, there's no travel this year between sites. All these teams were sequestered in Indianapolis. One of the reasons, while I like Baylor and I like Baylor to cover, but I'm not going to be giving them out, is free throw shooting. And they're number 211 shooting free throws out of the 347 teams. So, you're in the bottom 60 percentile. And you have a point guard in David Mitchell who shoots 63%. So that concerns me. Late in the game, if Houston's going to go to the Hack-a-Bears and start fouling, and then you have the decision as a head coach, do I leave my point guard in there who's only shooting 63%? Or do I pull my point guard out against one of the most elite defenses in the country? So that's the reason I'm not getting to the window with the Bears, and they won't be a customer late phone play. But again, I still think overall they're a lean for me.
One last question, because I asked it last week's show. Do you think Scott Drew has the coaching edge here?
No. I mean, you look at what Calvin Sampson has done, and let's go back to the Oklahomas and the Indiana years. Yeah, he didn't get here, but he's been in the tournament every year. So, would I rather have Drew over Calvin Sampson? Yes. Is it worth any points to me on the end of the handicapping prowess? Maybe worth a half a point, but not enough to tip the gauge at all for me.
Okay, Kelly, great stuff. Sorry, go ahead, Marco.
Kelly, I think whenever you talk coaches, you look more for that second game where you only have that 1 day to turn around. The extra time is an equalizer as far as coaches go, in my opinion, with the extra time to prepare.
My only question was for the novice bettor was because Kelvin Sampson isn't a big name, where Scott Drew has been talked about for a long time. And so I think when somebody hears those two, they're going to automatically assume that Baylor has the coaching edge. So very great point by both of you. Let's move on to the next game. Mark, I'm going to go to you first. UCLA, 14-point underdogs to the Zags, currently 145 in regard to the total. Marco, this morning I did WagerTalk today with Prez, and he said immediately, look at the total here. I think the total's a little bit high, and we've seen some money come in from 146 now down to 145. Any thoughts before we talk about this matchup in regards to the total?
Well, on the surface, you're looking at the total, and it depends which way you want to look at it. If you're going to look at it from the Gonzaga side, Gonzaga can put up 80 in a heartbeat with no problem at all. The question mark is UCLA, because we know they're a defensive team, and if UCLA is going to have any chance in this game, it's not going to be by trying to run with the Zags. They can't do that. Gonzaga has way too many offensive weapons. They got to try to slow this game down, play a hardcore defense, and if you look at Mick Cronin and where his roots come from, he's a defensive-minded coach, and that's what we saw yesterday against Michigan, as he made Michigan work for every bucket that they got. So the total initially, it looks like a number. It looks like a big number, but it's, again, to me, I think it's one of those correlated parlays. If you like Gonzaga, you're going to lean to the over. If you like UCLA, you're going to lean to the under. So that's where I'll say on that goes. For me to actually have a play, I don't. As far as this game goes, you look at UCLA, and the one thing I'll say out of the gate, if for some reason UCLA has this game close in the second half, they have a huge advantage, okay? Because, one, Gonzaga hasn't really been tested. Two, UCLA has had two knockdown, drag-out games already in this tournament. So they got the experience and that pressure factor already played. The first game that they played, the play-in game against Michigan State, they had to go to overtime. That was a nip-and-tuck ball game the whole way, or I should say down the stretch, and they were able to come out of that one alive. And then the game we saw last night. And, our buddy Johnny Detroit, went to see his alumni, for his birthday. And, unfortunately, great game, but come down to the final shot, couldn't get it done with Michigan. That's going to bode well for UCLA as far as the experience goes if this is tight. But now let's talk about the line. It's a 14-point spread. Nobody is expecting this to be a tight game, Kelly. And when you look at the numbers, I got to scratch my head. USC was an 8.5-point dog last night. You're telling me that on a neutral floor, based on what last night's line was, that you're going to say that USC is 5.5 points better than UCLA. I think that's a little bit much. Or let's flip it around the other way and say, okay, you had Michigan laying last night. What were they laying? 5 to UCLA. And now UCLA, they were getting 5.5. Now they're getting 14. Is Gonzaga that many points better than Michigan? What I'm getting at is I think this line is too high. I'm looking at this number, and I know Gonzaga has done everything asked of them, and I've said it all year. They're the most complete team. They're offensively, there isn't anybody better. They're just so efficient with the basketball. They can score from anywhere. They can put up, 80 to 90 points in a heartbeat. What is surprising about this team is how good they are defensively. And teams don't realize that and what's happening. And it's why Gonzaga, and I know my buddy in crime here, Ralph, has rode it to death. And again, if it ain't broke, as he says, don't fix it. Bet Gonzaga for the first half. It's been money in the bank. We'll talk about that later in best bets for me. But, the reason that's worked so well is teams can't stop that offense because it's so efficient, but they're shocked at the defense. When they're playing at the speed that they're playing at, they're having trouble figuring it out early. We saw USC, it's 7-0 before they blinked their eye. Here's a very misleading stat. If you just look at the box score, you see that the turnovers were 10-9, okay? Only one more turnover did USC have last night. But that doesn't tell the story of the game. The turnovers were one of the most important factors of the game because USC had all of them like in the first 8 minutes. They had 6 turnovers to none for Gonzaga in those early minutes. Why? Because they couldn't figure out Gonzaga defensively and they were turning the ball over. You give that offense that is so, efficient, 6 more possessions in the early going. That's how you turn around and look up at the scoreboard and you're down 15 points early, and it was never a game after that. That's one of those other things where we talk about the difference from having a week to prepare and have the short turnaround. You're not going to have that short turnaround to prepare for Gonzaga. Mick Cronin, in his defensive mind, is going to have 3 full days to prepare a game plan. Granted, and we want to note, it's shorter turnaround from the Elite Eight to the Final Four this year because they played on Monday and Tuesday instead of Saturday and Sunday. But it's also negated by they're not traveling to a different site. They're staying put where they're at so they don't lose that day in, travel and fatigue, whatever, if somebody's coming from the West Coast or whatever. So they're going to be prepared for this. I don't see UCLA getting off to that slow start. And if we're going to talk about value, the value here is clearly on UCLA in this game. So my lean for the show is to take UCLA plus the 14. Call me stubborn, maybe. I had USC last night, but I just cannot fathom that if I considered USC at 8.5, how I cannot take UCLA at 14. And the one thing I'll put the bad on me, Kelly, for yesterday is I didn't put enough stock in how big and satisfying the win for USC was over Oregon because of all the sidebar stuff where they thought they should have won the Pac-12 and because of the technicality, and they gave it to Oregon because of the win percentage and the shenanigans that Oregon did or didn't do by canceling a game late in the season. Maybe that took a little bit more out of USC. That's not going to happen here with UCLA. I like the points.
Marco, you make a ton of great points. And before I get to Ralph, I wanted to touch on a few of those. The Pac-12 tournament, USC, neutral field to UCLA, they were a 1-point winner. So you're absolutely right here. Look, I said that UCLA catching 14 was too many points, but that is a great comparison, coupled with the fact that Gonzaga has covered their last 3 games against everybody up until, their last 5 games up until everybody against BYU in their West Coast Conference tournament, which was, as you know, a late ball by BYU to get that back door. I do believe the bookmakers are asking Gonzaga backers to start paying a premium. I've seen even Ralph, as he mentioned, betting the first half starting to even be juiced minus 120 at some spots. So the bookmakers are tired of getting a bath here. I really do believe that this line should be closer to 11. Ralph, can you tell me what you make this game and who you like?
Well, I think it's a point or two high, but Marco, I'm going to disagree. And Kelly, just to correct you for 1 minute, when UCLA played USC, UCLA was at home getting 2.5. So that is a 5.5 point line, exactly what the difference was from last night's game. They played them on March the 6th. Yeah, they won the game, but again, they were still getting 2.5 at home in that game. Part of the reason you have to remember that you're getting a point or two value with UCLA is because every sports book is heavy with Zags full season props. The Zags took over 24% of all bets to win the national championship. So the books are now investing where they want people to bet UCLA, try to get some of that Zags money back, and then they hedge it. Therefore, I think the line is bigger. I have bet Gonzaga in the first half 7 times this year. I've gone 7-0. I'm not going to do it here, though. I do lean, in my best bet, I'll talk about the total. But, you have a UCLA team. There's a difference here. We think back to the last national championship of Texas Tech and Virginia. We think back of great defensive teams that scores were in the 40s and 50s. It's a big difference from the UCLA Bruins to those Virginia Cavaliers teams. This UCLA team is not a great defense. They're a very good defense. They're in the 40s or 50s as far as KenPom concerns. What Mick Cronin does is the same thing as Cincinnati. When he has the ball, he takes all 30 seconds on the shot clock to take that time up. So that's why you have low-scoring games. It's not an elite defense. It's one of the country's slowest tempos. Virginia happened to have both. Virginia had an elite defense for those couple of years and tempos. That's why you saw teams score in the 40s and 50s. But they've never faced an offense like the Zags. You don't have, in the Zags this year, 29 out of 30 games. This is the most remarkable stat. I mean, the Zags have a list of this much of remarkable stats. But in 29 of the 30 Zags games, 4 players scored in double figures. That shows you who can have the ball. They have the best guard. They have the best guard-center combo in the country. You have a 5-star point guard in Jalen Suggs. You add in Timmy. You add in Kippert, who might win Player of the Year. You had Nembhard. You had the size and the defense. I think the Zags come out, and I think it's going to be harder for UCLA's defense to adjust for the Zags offense than it is for the Zags offense to adjust to the defense. Marco talked about the correlated parlay early this year, and I can agree with that, to some point. You have a total of 145, and you have a line of 114. So you take the 14 off the 145, that leaves you 131. So we're talking 65.5 points. So, do you think the Zags can get to 79.5? Do you think Colorado can get to, or UCLA can get to 60.5? So when you're breaking down your half times, your sides, and your totals, take those two numbers in effect when you're playing out the game. I think the Zags are the most well-coached team I've ever seen. I think they are the most disciplined team I've ever seen. I think they are so mature. They come out, they are absolutely focused from the get-go. That's why I've played them in the first half for so many times. And, I'll just preface my best bet here. I think they come out, they control the tempo early for USC. I think UCLA cannot afford to fall behind by double digits in the first half. Therefore, UCLA has to raise their tempo a little bit. So I'll be going over in the first half. And when you told me, Kelly, God bless Prez, if it's NHL, I'm not going to against him. But when you tell me Prez likes the under, that makes my overplay in the first half even stronger.
Oh, Ralph, you got to love the punches thrown between Bet on It and Wager Talk today. Our producer, Joe, is hysterically laughing in my ear. Marco, I'd like to kick it back to you. I was just peeking at both teams' schedules because sometimes I like to see if teams outside of the USCs of the world, which Gonzaga just beat pretty single-handedly yesterday, if they had played any other teams. And it reminded me that UCLA had put on a nice little clinic against BYU. Does that hold any weight in you looking at the Bruins here against the Zags?
I generally, Kelly, don't do comparisons because different teams have different styles and matchups, play into effect there. So how many times have you heard me on, when we did bet on it during the football, I'd come up with one of my ABC games where I say the public's going to look and say team A beat team B and so forth. It doesn't work that way in sports betting. So no, I don't do the comparisons that way.
I just had to double check because I looked at it, and I sometimes get that, we'll call it like a public brain, a Joe public brain, where I like to think like that and kind of reverse engineer it. So thank you for answering that. I'll let you have a final word here on the UCLA Gonzaga game.
Yeah, it's one of those ones, like I said, I'm taking UCLA for the game. It's pure value. That's what we're here to do and provide. And as Ralph said, the books are tired. They're tired of getting Gonzaga money. They need to slow the Gonzaga train down. And the only way to do that is to raise the line. Now, there's always that pushback point. And we've seen it so many times where the public's going to be on the favorite and, us so-called sharps, we're going to be on the dog. And sometimes the public just does get the money that the team is that good. But this is one of those instances that I'm going to say not, and I'm going to say we're going to get a tighter game than people expect. And just to say the one thing about when Ralph said towards the end of the season and the line was 2.5 in that game, I'll also point out that was right in the middle of UCLA having a 4-game losing streak there at the end of the season when they weren't playing well. They're playing, their best basketball, obviously, of the season right now because they entered the tournament from the start with that play-in game. Everybody said, why? Why UCLA and Michigan State for that play-in game? Neither one of them deserved it. Well, who would have thunk it? One of those teams from the play-in has gone all the way to the big dance to the Final Four. So, they're riding high. They're playing with, as we like to say here in Vegas, they're playing with house money, Kelly.
They are playing with house money. I, however, am not. I was on USC with you yesterday. I am also on UCLA with you this weekend. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to chat some look-ahead lines from our friends over at the Westgate Superbook for those possible championship game matchups.
Sign up for the free WagerTalk text club to gain access to free plays and exclusive discounts. Just text WagerTalk to 33222 to sign up and get a $10 coupon to use on WagerTalk.com.
Welcome back to Bet On It. Let's dive into those possible championship game matchups. I asked our friends over at the Westgate Superbook to provide us with some national championship potential lines. They only text me back 2. And I said, what about UCLA? And just as Marco just laughed, that's the exact response I got. So we're just going to do the Gonzaga ones here. I understand it's going to be a tough stretch for UCLA to pull the upset, but just for fun, I hope they do. Let's start off. Baylor would be around a 5-point underdog to Gonzaga. Ralph, A, do you agree with this line? And 2, if you do not, what do you make the game?
Yeah, Marco asked me this morning. I made it 4.5 or 5. I was in between. So, the one thing that Baylor has that nobody else has are the best guards in the country. You had Mitchell and Butler. You could fatigue there too. I mean, there's very few people. I would take that set of guards against anybody. So the problem is on the front court, you're going to get beat pretty bad. But I make it 4.5 or 5. If the games play out this week as I expect, I would be on the Zags first half minus the 3 points.
You love those Zags first half. Marco, something to consider here would be And the reason why we're actually touching on this is because this could be a powerful tool for the national championship game. If Gonzaga goes in and just blows out UCLA, we could see this line go a few ticks higher. So keep that in mind. But your thoughts on this early line of 5?
Yeah, and Kelly, you hit the nail on the head, is that this is what the numbers would be if nothing extraordinary happens in these two games. We know that these are going to be the two most watched games of, probably the entire season, and people are going to react to what they see with their eyes. And that's why we tell people, never overreact to one game. Nobody's ever as good or as bad as that one game. And anybody that saw Gonzaga last night thinks they're absolutely unbeatable. And, they pretty much looked it, but you're going to pay that price. If Gonzaga does have a close game with UCLA, like I'm hoping, and they get by, where I'm going to be on, Monday. I'll be on Gonzaga off the close game if they have it. But let's look at it and say, Baylor, this is the matchup everybody wanted to see from the start of the season. Gonzaga and Baylor. Baylor is the unknown factor because they missed those, 3 weeks during the season. Are they as good as we thought they were before COVID, or are they just a notch below that since they came back? I still say they're a very, very good team. Do they match up with Gonzaga? The guards will help, that's for sure. But I would think with Ralph, I would agree wholeheartedly that I would be very interested in Gonzaga for first half on the quick turnaround from Saturday to Monday. I think they would have a huge edge because there's just so much you have to prepare for with Gonzaga. As we get to the next game, when we talk about the line with Houston, if Houston gets by Baylor, okay, now you're going to have to say, even though it's the national championship game, how satisfying would it be for Houston to beat Baylor? Baylor's always been the bigger name of the state. It is a national championship game, so you're not going to have a letdown, and you're playing the number one team in the country. But that will be a satisfying win, and you got to turn around with just one day in between if you pull it off. And that would be another concern, another reason why I would consider Gonzaga in the first half come Monday with whichever matchup they get.
Ralph, you mentioned dogs of 8.5 or more in either the Final Four or national championship game. Well, the Houston Cougars, if they can upset Baylor, would be either a 9 or a 9.5 point dog to Gonzaga. This kind of plays into that 4-1 ATS you mentioned earlier. Depending on how well Gonzaga plays against UCLA, obviously will dictate whether or not I'm on Houston. But I thought that nugget you provided earlier was rather interesting. Touch on this line, and what did you make this game?
Well, Kelly, I asked you before on last show if size mattered when USC played Oregon because the Trojans had the massive Mobley brothers. That's going to be the same thing here. Yeah, Houston's good. Houston can play defense. But when, Houston comes out and brings Gresham and Fabian White, two guys that are 6'7", 6'8", against the bigs from Zag, it's just too much of a mismatch. So that's, when we play it and we talk about lines, that's one thing. But what did I say at the beginning? I said, forget about seedings, forget about names, forget about records, look at matchups. You have Kispert and Timmy against two guys that are smaller and are going to get eaten up inside. So that's why looking now, I think there's value betting. You can get Zaga to win the national chip right now plus 120. I think there's value with that because you have them such a big favorite now, and the matchups they're going to have against either one with Kispert and Timmy on the inside, I just think are incredibly huge. Where I probably should change my best bet and say I saw the Zags plus 120 this morning. To me, that is the best bet of the Final Four round.
That's actually a great number, Ralph, and I'm shocked that it is actually plus money. I would have laid 120. I believe the Zags have almost a 50% chance to win the national championship. Either way, we're going to step out for a quick commercial break. When we return, it is time for Best Bets.
Are you ready for baseball? The 2021 MLB regular season begins on April 1st and goes all the way through the World Series in November, giving fans over 200 days of baseball action. To help you have a profitable baseball season, WagerTalk has taken our top 2 handicappers and combined them in an amazing combo deal. The number 1 MLB overall all-time is Brian Leonard, and the number 1 MLB totals all-time is Dwayne Bryant. MLB through the World Series is priced at $10.95 per handicapper. $8.95 for early bird pricing. But right now you can lock in the number 1 MLB all-time overall and number 1 MLB all-time totals handicapper for the price of 1. Lock in both Brian Leonard and Dwayne Bryant's baseball selections through the World Series in November for only $8.95.
Welcome back to Bet On It. It is everyone's favorite segment. It's time for Best Bets. Per usual, ladies go first, so I'm up to bat. Not exactly thrilled that my guys disagree with me here, but I'm going to take the Houston Cougars +5. I mentioned this line seemed a little short, fishy, if you will. I thought that Baylor would be closer to a 7-point favorite over this Houston team. So because the line is so short, it had me look into this game a little bit more. Truth be told, this Houston team wasn't a team I was following this season. I mainly focused on Big 12, Big 10, and it wasn't until Brett mentioned to me that he liked the value on this team to win it all, and I started looking into this Cougs team pre-tourney. I had them in my bracket to advance to the Elite Eight, but this is a team I actually think has a chance to advance to the national championship. They have a top 10 offense, a top 10 defense. They absolutely are on my radar. Ralph mentioned forgetting team names on the jerseys. If you strip down these two teams, this is just too many points. You got to give me the Cougs. I'll take the +5. Sprinkle a little bit on that money line. All right, Marco, you are up next.
All right, Kelly, for my best bet, we talked about UCLA the whole show here. I'm going to use them, but I'm going to use them. I know that we talked about Gonzaga in the first half and everything, but this line is just way too high. I can get UCLA +8, and you know what? If you wait, you might get an 8.5 on this one. First half play against Gonzaga. We know what UCLA is going to do. Mick Cronin's going to take the air out of the basketball. He's got 3 days to prepare. They're not going to be surprised by that defense. They're going to look and see what their friendly foe that they know and played a few times, USC, did wrong and make the corrections not to have that happen. They won't turn the ball over 6 times in the first 8 minutes of the game. And I see them being a much closer game going to halftime. I'll grab the 8 points with UCLA first half bet. I'm sure my buddy Ralph's going to have something to say about that because I'm stepping in front of a freight train that's been an absolute money tree for backers this year. But it's got to stop somewhere, Kelly, and there's too much value with UCLA.
Marco with the ultimate contrarian play. And the funny thing is I don't hate it. All right, Ralph, who is your best bet for the Final Four?
Yeah, Marco, you know when it's going to stop? After Monday night. Anyway. I'm actually going to go over UCLA and the Zags. Again, UCLA is not an elite defensive team. They hold teams down because of the pace. The Zags are number 4 in tempo. So who do you think is going to win out? The best offense with a fast tempo or a decent defense with a slow tempo? I think fast offense wins. First half, 68.5. I like the value there. I also have a player prop looking at Houston, and I like Grimes. Grimes total 15.5 points. He's averaging 18 points during March Madness. He's had 14 or more points each of his last 11 games. He's averaged over 9 3-point shots in his last 14 games. We talked about Baylor as well. They're not an elite defense. They're an excellent defense with slow tempo, but they're number 125 in 3-point defense. So Zags, UCLA over first half, and Houston's Grimes over 15.5 points.
Ralph, I actually like that first half over as we've seen those first half unders coming in. It is time for our last commercial break. When we come back, it's the recap.
Lock in all sports, all plays, all 5% best bets for the next 30 days from your favorite WagerTalk handicapper for only $1.99 versus the regular price of $3.49 for a total savings of $1.50. Prices are already discounted across the board and no coupon is required. Just head over to WagerTalk.com, pick your favorite handicapper in the experts menu, and lock them in for 30 days across all sports for only $1.99.
It's just me for the recap. Marco, busy watching yet another horse race. Let's break down the last few plays for March Madness. As I mentioned, my best bet is the Houston Cougars. I also like UCLA. Marco and I agreement there, but we are head to head. He likes Baylor. Ralph also leans Baylor. Ralph says his best bet is going to be UCLA Gonzaga. First half over 68.5. And he also has a player prop for you guys. Grimes over 15.5 points. I'm with Marco with the ultimate contrarian play as his best bet, UCLA first half +8. Every single week, you guys tune in, you hang out with us. Appreciate you guys coming in to bet on it, spending your week with us. Thank you again for tuning in. We will see you this football season. Marco did maybe mention we might have an NBA finals little preview for you guys this summer, but if not, good luck this week. Good luck during baseball season. Make sure you guys head over to WagerTalk.com. Check out all of our great baseball handicappers. Again, good luck in the Final Four and the national championship game.